Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to another Fein Points. Hi, Bruce. Hi, Ryan. So happy to see you again this Monday, morning or afternoon, depending upon which time zone you're in. I would like to, normally, as everyone knows, I give a prefatory comments to before we begin our conversation. But instead of me making prefatory comments, I'd like to share with everyone a video clip that Ryan shared with Bruce and myself. So let me get to the clip and play it. And here we go. If I'm technically competent at doing this.
Says you only need 1 in 30 people to create monumental change. That's the 3.5% rule politicians never tell you about. In school, we're taught democracy is all about majority rule, but history and data tell a different story. According to political scientist Erica Chenoweth, no nonviolent movement that engaged at least 3.5% of a population has ever failed. Just 1 in 30 people, if they're organized, persistent, and peaceful, can topple regimes, rewrite laws, and reshape society. That's not theory, it's over 100 years of data. Take the US Civil Rights Movement. At its peak, the movement never mobilized the majority of Americans, but it didn't need to. In 1963, over 250,000 people marched on Washington. That's less than 0.2% of the US population at the time. But that wasn't the whole picture. It was the tip of an iceberg. Churches organized carpools. College students staged sit-ins. Pastors, janitors, teachers quietly and courageously refused to back down. This movement didn't win with numbers. It won with discipline. It won with strategy. It won with nonviolence. And it changed American history forever. You don't need a million-person budget or mass market appeal to make an impact. You need to find your 3.5%. The right people, aligned, trained, committed. That's how you shift systems, whether it's in politics, business, or behavior design. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. In fact, nothing else ever has." Turns out science backs her up. So if you want to change, don't start by convincing the masses. Start by organizing your 3.5%.
I'll jump in since that's a video that I shared. I mean, I think that's a really important thing to think about. But I've got some thoughts and critiques and some important things to take from it. So the obvious thing, one of my favorite quotes was that Margaret Mead quote, which of course is never to say that you agree with everything they ever did, which is always what that goes to, just that the words are correct, right? And that the idea is simply that it doesn't have to be some mass movement. It can be started by one dedicated person or group. Now, the way I think that reads, it's not necessarily that means that one person or group will all be the ultimate end game, but that's what gets that momentum going, that it starts with that dedicated movement. But sometimes it can be the alternative. What I thought was really interesting is the important thing to take away from that is can, not will, but can make that difference, right? So it's right now today, I think a lot of people are very jaded, like I am in a lot of ways, about where our world is and what our government's doing. And that they see that kind of thought and they go, oh, that's just, a trap or something, or it's not true. But I think regardless of what you think it can accomplish, the idea of dedicating yourself to something you care about is obviously positive. And I, throughout my experiences, have seen that exact thing take place. And to make the larger point about this, they discuss this in things from like a police perspective in protests that they know. That's kind of what I thought he was going with when I first saw this video, that the police, for example, have a number in their mind. They know that past a certain amount of people that they can't deal with that. They don't have jail cells. So that's why you'll see police back away sometimes when the protest gets large enough and they just go, we got to let it continue, because they know they've surpassed that number. It's the same mindset that governments have about these kind of things. And once it surpasses a certain kind of momentum, the way that it's dealt with shifts. And I think that's a really important thing for us to think about, and that overall with ideas in the same way. But I don't like the word training that he used there, and I'll leave it with that I don't like the way, because the bad side of this conversation does the same thing, right? Training and mobilizing, getting people like, this is what Jeffrey would talk about, the MAGA moron side of the conversation, right? These are people that are obsessively focused on training others to follow their lead, and it's not based on facts. So the whole core for that point for me is about what you believe in, your integrity, your principles, and dedicating yourself to what that means. And then, people can follow suit if they believe in that. And that kind of momentum can genuinely change things. And I very much believe in that.
Yeah, but I think that, to my mind, the critical thing is education. It's just to believe something doesn't mean that it's worth believing. It means that it needs to come upon by deep reflection, study, looking at experience, looking at history. Internal introspection. Is it the right thing to do? Not all ideas are equal. Some are just off the top of your head and are zany and stupid and bad, like women were witches and needed to be burned. And that idea prevailed for many, many centuries. Yeah? Not a good idea. And that's why, and if you're going to have, in my judgment, a change for the better, it's got to be based upon education, wisdom, and virtue. And sometimes the change can be the worst. We're sitting today on July 14th, celebrating the Bastille Day. July 14th, 1789, the beginning of the French Revolution. Yeah, they were bad. They didn't have the education. They ended up with an emperor called Napoleon, who crowned himself in 1804. And I keep going back. Our only possible deliverance is education and wisdom. Humility to think we could get it wrong. Listen, always think, always question even your own tentative viewpoints. And if we think, again, historically, the American Revolution, July 4th, 1776, didn't jump like Athena out of Zeus's brain. It started at least as back as the stamp tax and James Otis's 1761. This is why writs of assistance are bad. You're destroying our right to be let alone. It was based on education and wisdom. The abolitionist movement that culminated in the 13th Amendment in 1865, I guarantee you, it didn't start in 1865. William Lord Garrison, all those who suffered enormously, tarred and feathered, tried to explain, as Abraham Lincoln did, why it's terrible, to have your own prosperity depend upon the labor of the sweat of another man's brow. And so these changes came about. True, they came about from a minority, but they were built on wisdom and virtue. It's the right thing to do. Not all change is going to be for the good. It's been said, and I forget who wrote the book, the three who made a revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution: Trotsky, Lenin, Stalin. Well, it was a revolution, but it was a horrible revolution. It made it even worse than the Romanovs. We can never, ever get away from the idea that we can never make progress, never move upward, unless we always fix on education and virtue, wisdom and character. And just because you have a minority who are fanatical doesn't mean it's for good, doesn't mean it's for bad either.
Right.
It was William Yeats who said, "The best lack all conviction and the worst are filled with passionate intensity." Not always true, but it's a warning for us.
Yeah, I think that when we think about America today, I think we think about America very different than the founders who started with a blank slate after declaring independence and created first the Articles of Confederation and then morphed into or transformed into the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We have to think about that all the people in that room, they agreed on what the objective function was. They agreed on the objective function was how do we have as small a government as possible and yet protect liberty. But the goal was liberty. That was what it was all about. The objective function was liberty. Now Americans seem to disagree with what that objective function is. But the objective function of the document that they passed, the Constitution that they ratified, that the people ratified, was a document whose ultimate objective was to preserve liberty, to protect liberty, to uphold liberty, to defend liberty. And they also said that the document would only succeed if we were educated, if we were just, and we were virtuous. So that's what, but there's there's separate issues out there. One is whether we are just and virtuous, and the other thing is do we even accept the objective function anymore? If people no longer accept the objective function anymore, then the only way to change the objective function would be a constitutional convention or an amendment of the Constitution. But you can't use the Constitution to attack what the Constitution was designed to defend. Right. So anyone who says the objective function of the country today, as reflected in the Constitution, is to advance, preserve, protect, and defend liberty, and that's the one objective function that was agreed upon, okay, then they are treasonous to the idea of America, to the Constitution, and they really are traitors. So I think educating people that the goal of the Constitution was not to figure out how government could become better ruling over people, okay? How government could become better at allocating resources, how government could get better at making decisions on our behalf, okay? So that was not the intention the founders didn't find a country saying, we really hope, that you keep figuring out better ways of destroying liberty, okay, and having government grow, okay. I don't know how anyone could read even Hamilton and think that his real goal was to make sure that we were creating a society where we wanted to incentivize government to become really good at destroying individual liberty, okay. So, but that's what it's interpreted today, is the fact is when people think through this document, probably because of the condition Bruce refers to, is just people with, a lack of proper civic education. And because of this lack of civic education, people don't really understand what the objective of our government was. And that was preserve, protect, defend our liberty.
Yeah, if I could add, I think that the structure of the Constitution itself, I think, fortifies exactly what you're saying, Jeffrey. The whole concept was that the national government was a government of limited power. Unless power is given, it's withheld, right? And if you look at the terms, the language of the Constitution, government shall not do X, Y, Z, and then it has limited powers, coin, currency, and regulate interstate commerce and things of that sort. And the key element in the structure was separation of powers in order to advance liberty, having checks and balances so no one group can become oppressive and destroy or compromise the liberty of any other faction in society. And the idea was that liberty is the right to march your own drum. You develop your faculties. When Thomas Jefferson created the University of Virginia, and they had Princeton, these are private universities. The government is not they weren't giving them grants. They weren't trying to control them and didn't control them ideologically. These are private institutions. A lot of the religious organizations created their own universities as well. That's what liberty is about. And I think where we became corrupted is that, and I take it back to the Spanish-American War, we decided liberty is too onerous. Let's just get our thrills off of being an empire and telling other people what to do, going abroad in search of monsters to destroy, and violating George Washington's admonition. No, the best foreign policy is to have nothing to do with foreign countries other than to have ambassadors, talk to them, and have free trade. But that's it. Otherwise, we don't have any entanglements whatsoever, because our pride comes from individual greatness and opportunities, not from government. Government should be a sideshow.
Right.
And that's the opposite. I mean, government's everywhere today. It is a complete disaster for the liberty that was celebrated by the framers and the authors. And unfortunately, I think our schools, Ryan and Jeffrey, they fortify and inculcate this stupidity.
Yep.
They're not teaching liberty
By design, I think.
Just do X, Y, Z. No, to go and all. What's their study? Their study in the schools, the government is X and government is Y. All the great presidential scholars say, like McGregor, Burns, and others, they all celebrate the presidency. No, the United States should be celebrating individual liberty. The Thomas Edisons, the all those who on their own were able to, Henry Ford's, those who built on their own industry and ambition and created new things, and authors and poets and Thoreau and Emerson. Why are we celebrating that people who are statesmen really want to limit government so that the pride is in the individual citizen for working on their own, developing their faculties, and having the ambition and discipline to succeed? The government provides the rule of law, but that's it.
Well, to go back to the beginning point, to bring it full circle, what's interesting to me is, what the statement is saying, what Margaret Mead quote, again, we'll just to reset it in your mind, never depend, where was it? I have it right here. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Again, the point is change the world, not save, right? So it's really it's about change, not necessarily that it's going to go in a positive way, to make what Bruce is Bruce is making. So the point is that just as much as we can recognize how that can influence the conversation and change things, good or bad, so too do the powers that want to take control of the way people think. And now, but see, the difference is these are endless resources, media apparatus, like this, endless ability to, force their view into your mind. And so the idea is that we're battling something like that. And it's about, like you said, Bruce, Just because they believe it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing. They may, and here's my point about the conflict of the MAGA direction, is there are people that believe, even though it's the wrong thing, that they're doing it for the right reasons, or that it is the right thing because they're played. But it's no less being a moron, as we talk about, right? Still being lost in that. But the point is that bad people are using these things to try to get you to feel that this is kind of my larger point, the fake momentum, right? That is what's happening, right? This is the revolution for the mind. We're going to change everything. We're going to fight the deep state and change it. That's what I think is happening, to kind of bring that all full circle. So I'm glad you made that point, Bruce, because that's really important, because it goes both ways.
Yeah, for sure. And again, the strength of conviction isn't a measure of its truth. I mean, people can believe the dumbest, stupidest things with great zeal.
Yep.
And we know that's true. Look at all the religious wars.
Yeah,
and that's why the essence of self-government is developing critical faculties in everyone. Ask questions. Who's saying it? What is the evidence? And always open to the opportunity that you could be wrong. Always listen for more evidence. You might change your mind. It might not. And that's the basic of civilization. And it's that kind of critical thinking that I believe diminishes zealotry. It diminishes fanaticism, because everybody is understood. I'm fallible. I need to walk carefully here because I could be wrong. So you have to act at some point. You can't be irresolute like Hamlet forever. But you don't have this idea that, oh, if you don't believe me, you're evil. You must have a bad spirit. We not to smash you over the head, And that's erupts then in violence, the opposite of what we need in order to have civilization, self-government, and everybody has the opportunity to develop their faculties and find their own fulfillment. That is truly, truly, truly great.
And going back to both, Margaret Mead's quote, this person's video that we opened this show with, and both Ryan and Bruce's, your comments, that basically, again, if we're going to have any kind of conversation about a policy, about a change, a transformation, whatever it should be, as long as we're doing it under the context of it being a legal change subject to our Constitution, unless we amend it or have a convention and replace it, we repeal and replace it, then the burden should be on whoever wants to make the change to justify how it advances the cause of liberty. And
that it's not repugnant to the Constitution as it is already.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we don't have any public policy where anyone says, this is my policy and let me tell you why it advances the cause of liberty. And that's basically the goal of everything government should do, is to advance the cause of liberty. And that simple concept is understood by very few people. And what a national tragedy it has. And the fact is, again, that our civic education is so poor that simple idea, that simple concept is understood by so few people. And I'd like to go back to a couple of other, since Ryan, you started it off with that, sharing that video and reminding Bruce and myself of Margaret Mead. I shared with both of you two other quotes that I'd like to share now. Never depend upon institutional government to solve any problem. All social movements are founded by, guided by, motivated, and seen through by the passion of individuals. We want to affect change. We affect change by convincing other people that the change is good for them and that they can determine on their own basis, voluntarily, that the ideas you're sharing with people, that you're communicating with people, make them better off, so they adapt and adopt the change of their own free will, not by any coercive force. Okay, that's basically the concept. Okay, the other quote that I think goes along with the previous two quotes is that that to demand that another love what one loves is tyranny enough. So we should not force people to like what we like. We should not force people to agree with us because we have an opinion about something. That is tyranny, imposing our views on somebody else because it's something we like. But then the quote goes on and says, but to demand that another hate what one hates is even worse, okay? And the example I will give to that is our debate over immigration and open borders. Okay. So every people who think that an open border is a horrible idea, okay, and expect everyone else to hate it because they hate it, is even a worse form of tyranny than the tyranny of wanting to convince people of something that they love, that everybody should love what they love. So, and our debate is today, our conversation, to the extent that there is one, which there isn't really, is just about hating people who hate because hating others because they don't hate what we hate. And we want to force them to hate what we hate. And if they don't hate what we hate them for not hating what we hate. Okay.
Yeah. I've always said, Jeffrey, I want to interject here.
Sick.
Okay. The only what I call pure, uncontaminated force or exercise of power is the power of example, moral suasion. That is uncontaminated. People do things not because you give them money, not because you threaten them with violence, but because your example inspires them to model their behavior off of you. It's the only way that kind of influence is enduring, because it doesn't require a limitless source of money or violence or weapons. And it's purely peaceful. And it's not contaminated. The person who establishes the model isn't seeking to have power by ulterior motives. But that's where we are. That's why you always have to be suspicious of government, because it's there to influence you with two things: money or violence. Ulterior motives, never pure. And that means that the way that they influence is always fragile, because as soon as the money or the power goes away, people then return, to like little kids running off to college and do all these pranks and other horrible things. And we are so far away from that today. I mean, in general, I think in a healthy society that really does celebrate liberty, you pick up the newspaper and the government would appear on page 18, right? The front page stories are about the individuals. They did this. There's a new play written. There was a new invention. Thomas Edison did this and that. Okay, as someone showed that they were great learning and they inspired others to take care of people who were unfortunate because they ran into bad times or something of that sort. Today, it's the opposite. I mean, everything, you look at the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all the stories are always about government. The op-ed pages are filled with that. That's a very, very bad symptom of a disease, of government elephantiasis. Government should be a sideshow. Instead, it's the main show.
And I absolutely agree with that. And I think one of the things that all three of us are always on the same page about is that, government should not be a government dictating our lives. It's the other way around, right? We are the ones that are told we're in control of the situation. But I think that's what most Americans are rapidly realizing actually isn't true. And by the way, I'd love to get into a longer conversation with you guys about voting and the reality of that, but not necessarily for today. But I think back to your point, Jeffrey, I think what's interesting is, But first of all, the other side of that, which I'm sure you were going to, added to that, was the other side as well, right? So whether it's about open borders or completely closed, it's the idea of forcing your opinion of what you love or hate onto somebody else. And I think that's obviously what we're dealing with every day. And it comes from both sides of the partisanship, right? And it's usually this kind of cartoonish version of something that's usually more in the middle for most people in this country. I think that's designed to cause like a stalemate. Like designed to cause people digging in. It doesn't change. And that's the best situation for a despotic government to continue to do what it wants around the world and to us while we're distracted focusing on our neighbors. That's what I really think that sentiment comes down to, is that, well, one, just obviously pointing out tyranny of the individual and of the government, but that how that's used against us is where I'm going with that. And I think that relates to a lot of what we're going to talk about.
But that's what politics is about these days.
Right.
A wedge issue. The politician never wants to actually resolve a problem.
Right.
They want to keep it festering forever so that they can get their fanatical base to come out. They want the problem to persist forever. I mean, it's everywhere in politics. Bibi Netanyahu does not want the war in Gaza or Iran. It doesn't want it to end. That's the end of his political career, right? So they want these horrible things to persist. That's how base these these officials are, which underscores again, give them as little power as possible. They will use everything, every resource they have for an ulterior bad motive. Now they have to have some power, but that's what they're going to do. You know,
I'm going to go back to immigration on this issue. Okay, yeah. Biden had proposed a bill that a few Republicans were willing to support regarding some sort of border enforcement. What did Biden say? Biden said, "Give me a little more money. I will enforce the border better. It might not be as good as you want it enforced, but it'll be significantly better than I'm currently enforcing it. And in addition to that, one of the things I want to do is I want to make it more difficult to get people seek asylum. I want to deal with asylum cases quicker. So I need judges, and I want to get more technology to the border, and I want to get more border guards, to the border." And what do the Republicans say? Well, you know what? In order to ensure the border and as far as enforce it with respect to immigration, you already have more than enough money to accomplish that. Okay, you don't need any more money to accomplish that more. So I would write to people then. I said, I wonder if Trump becomes president, they're going to tell Trump we don't need to spend any more money in immigration enforcement because you've already said that's unnecessary while Biden was president. So,
but Jeffrey, we need to embellish on what you're saying, because the Republicans in the Senate went along with Biden. They came up with a good bill.
Yes.
The reason why it got killed, because Trump didn't want to let Biden get credit for anything. He's already anticipating 2024, and he says, kill the bill. And that was the end of it, right?
He said kill the bill because they don't need any more money. They have all the weapons, the tools necessary to accomplish that objective.
Yeah.
So the Republicans back then said that not a single dollar more was needed to be appropriated. Trump said that. Yeah. The same Trump who had this one big, beautiful, budget-busting piece of shit, okay, now asked for more money than every other country's military in the world except for the U.S. and China. No other country, the military in the world, has a budget the size of the budget we now have for border enforcement. Before we were told not one more dollar needed to be spent.
Yeah. We now have more border patrol, ICE agents than FBI agents for the whole country, just looking at immigration. But I want to say this is not unique, and this goes back to why we need to be very cynical about government. This happens all the time in presidential politics. Kill it so that you never let anybody get credit if you think you can destroy it, right?
So hurt the people for a momentary gain.
Yeah, for a momentary gain. That's why the last thing that the Reagan people wanted, and we know that, Jeffrey, was before 1980 to have the hostages released and get Jimmy Carter get the credit for it. Why would they want to do that? So I don't pick on Reagan or anybody else. That is the nature of politics. You have to have some politics, but this is another reason why you have to be very suspicious, on your guard. These people never have any philanthropic good reason for what they do. It's all, can this help me politically? And that's why they're always, do not let anybody else get credit for anything if you can grab it for yourself.
Well, one thing is to understand politicians operating opportunistically to accrue power. The other is a population of stupid people who have no civic education, who can't say, gee, didn't yesterday you say one thing and now you're saying something that's a complete contradiction
but
to
today,
what you said the other day. And
the
question is, why should I keep believing what you say if yesterday you said one thing and today you're selling something else? Why do you think I should continue to believe anything you say tomorrow? So the question is that people with a civic-minded education, independent of whatever their own ideology, they should be questioning everyone, even if that person shares their ideology, that they should have some sort of, intellectual honesty about it. And a civic-minded people would demand intellectual honesty. They would demand a virtue. They sit back and say, our government can only succeed. Our founders said, this will only work if we're virtuous people. How could you be lying so much and think that that's consistent with being virtuous people and with the circumstances that are needed in order for this exercise in self-government to work. What you're doing is destroying the ability for this system to work by lying and lying again and repeatedly lying. You're destroying the social contract that makes the Constitution unworkable. It's an act of to lie like this is treasonous to the idea of the Constitution.
But I'm sure you've seen what's going on with the Epstein discussion, right, Jeffrey? I mean, and this is always we always have a good conversation about this because I think we have slightly different opinions, which is good for the conversation, right? But that I think, like I've always been saying, that more people are becoming aware of this. And I can't know that for sure, just an opinion based on what I'm seeing. And I think that that's been shifting, but I agree with you that far, far, far too many people are lost, like you're highlighting. But just moving this to the next part, have you seen what's been going on with the recent post from Donald Trump? We don't have to get into it, but the point simply being that one statement about forget about Jeffrey Epstein. Who's Jeffrey Epstein? Why do you guys care about this? That movement has broken. Like, I'm serious. Like, it is completely falling apart right now. Highest levels of their movement, people are starting to call out Trump. But hey, tomorrow it could all come back together, and maybe it was all a ploy. But it's interesting to see, and I think it speaks to what we're always talking about, that there are a lot of people that have been played, but I think there's a breaking point, and I think they're seeing it.
Well, they see some, but I think they're selective on looking at the lies. Some lies they care about, other lies they don't. But it's true. I mean, Pam Bondi goes on TV repeatedly. I've got the list right before me. I'm going to send it out, and then she says, the next day the list doesn't exist. Well, what happened? Did it disappear like this Cheshire cat? In Alice in Wonderland or something like that?
She told an obvious lie. The question she got from the media was specifically about the list. It was not about some file sitting on a list. Yeah. She said, do you have the list? She said, the list is on my desk. Yeah. She didn't say, I have a file on my desk and I have no idea whether there's a list inside that file. Okay. If you want to communicate honestly, you communicate clearly. Okay. So if she got a question, she's a lawyer, okay? A lawyer, okay? You would assume as an attorney general, as a lawyer, that she's not a moron, okay? So you could think that she had the intellectual capacity of understanding the question, you do have a list, okay? And she was as a lawyer, and lawyers are the people most skilled at qualifying statements, right? Okay? That's their job, is to figuring out how to make every statement qualified, okay? That's what a skilled lawyer does. That's their expertise in making qualifications to statements. So this attorney general, supposedly a brilliant lawyer, gets a question about a list, and her answer is not, I don't know whether I have a list. I have a file on my desk and I haven't looked inside the file. She said, yes, I have a list and I'm reviewing that list now, okay? So she acknowledged she had a list. She understood the question. She answered the question. She understood that she was not being asked about a file where she had no knowledge whatsoever of what the contents were that are in the file. Now, if you're a moron, okay, with zero cognitive skills, okay, you will accept her explanation as a reasonable explanation, as instead of it being pure bullshit, okay? So an educated, reasonable person with some reasonable degree of intellect, who thought with intellectual honesty, okay, who had some civics background, would say she is full of shit, okay? So, which she is. She knew and understood the question. She answered the question. And now they're coming up with bullshit terminology because they know people are morons, and people will accept the explanation without the thought because they know that most of the people are morons and will not think about the words in the type of careful nature that we should think about people's words. And the whole idea of communication should be to be clear in communicating. You assume that when you're saying something, you want the people you're talking to have an understanding about what you said. And if you assume that you want everyone to have the same understanding, so you try and say it with a clarity so people don't walk away saying, what did he say, or what did she say, okay? So only a bullshitter speaks without absence of clarity, and then they come up with some sort of bullshit explanation of why their bullshit was not really bullshit.
And this is a different thing that's been happening that I keep seeing. And I think Trump has really made this an art form, is that, like, kind of what you're saying is that they deliberately, and I'm not sure if I think this about Bondi, I agree with your opinion of her, but Trump, it has a way of casting an answer like right down the middle of the lane and letting people assume what they think he means from it on both sides of the conversation. That works for him in both ways. And so it's an interesting thing to add to that, is maybe that's part of the logic. She's just taking orders from Trump, but doing kind of the same thing. But it's worth considering that that's a tactic as opposed to just being incompetent. But I think it's obviously both in a lot of their cases.
Well, listen to what Trump said. We saw it on TV in the Oval Office. Remember? I'm totally powerless to get back Abrego Garcia.
Right.
What happened? He said over this millions, billions of people saw him say that. And Bukele, the president of El Salvador, there's no way we can get him back. And then right now, as we speak, Abrego Garcia is back in the United States, right? Yep. We were able to do it. Did you lie? He obviously did lie. He could have gotten him back anytime he wanted to. It was just a political calculation. He wanted to change his mind. And I say that's where we are. And I'm saying, to my mind, the most dangerous and alarming element of our politics now is that truth has not even a crumb of content to it. In politics, truth is whatever you say it is for that time and place. And tomorrow it could be the opposite. There's no integrity. There are no limitations. There's no cognitive dissonance. And it's just accepted. Okay, well, people lie all the time, so who cares? I lied today. Why should that get you upset? And that is accepted without alarm. I mean, what the hell?
If you're a civic-minded person, understanding that we want to promote liberty, and there are certain prerequisites for promoting liberty, which is respect for inalienable rights, independent of whatever ideology we have about the role of the relationship of government with respect to citizen, okay, and policy differences, okay, whoever is sitting in the White House, who basically is depriving people of their rights, okay, doing it knowingly, willingly, obviously maliciously, keeping somebody detained in circumstances that you know they shouldn't be there, that you know you have complete control over it, and pretending you don't have. No civic-minded person should find it acceptable, whether you agree ideologically with that person occupying the Oval Office or not. Okay. Again, there should be the one thing that we all should agree upon is the Constitution. Okay. You know, we could disagree on ideology, but we should disagree on the concept, and we should understand that that's their oath they take to uphold it. That's their one duty. That's their one requirement. That's their one obligation, is uphold the Constitution. So he went out, he told the lie. Many other members of administration told the lie. They knew that they had complete control over the people that were there in El Salvador, and they just lied to the courts. They lied to the American people, you know, and they kept this person under circumstances where they know they made a mistake, and they just did not give a shit. Okay.
You know, there's a much more stark example. Like these are all great examples, but the ones that stand out to me the most are, for example, Stephen Miller just claiming they won that 7-0 ruling from the Supreme Court. That blew my mind. That marked for me a moment where I'm like, okay, we're beyond like the nuance of disagreement in the partisan side. That's just like you said, just lie and just stand by it. And everyone in that room said, yep. Now look at you. That's just a crazy moment to realize that they know they're lying and are just willing to see it through. I think that's the influence from the technocratic side.
Yeah, really, I mean, my favorite is, this is a text message that the lawyer later fired trying to defend, which was indefensible, what was being done with Abrego Garcia. He writes to his supervisor, says, okay, our next filing will be an emoji with a middle finger in it. That's what their argument is to the court.
Wow.
That's I mean, I work Justice Department. This is in the United States Justice Department. That's a filing in the court, an emoji with a middle finger in it. That's how far we've fallen in terms of justice.
Sorry, I'd love to hear your thoughts, since you're bringing this part up, about the Aaron Melnick. Forget the group he works for. It's an immigration counsel. He's a lawyer. He's been talking a lot about this stuff. He was pointing out the importance of, rather, the kind of how wild it is to see that the court has just argued, I think it was Judge Zenas, that the U.S. government has destroyed the presumption of regularity, continuing to just lie to him. Can you explain what that is? Like, I'm still trying to understand what that, I mean, it seems to be a very big deal, but if help us understand what that means, if you don't mind.
No, okay. This is, the practice of law, especially the government, relies very, very much on representations that attorneys make to courts as being true, because the courts can't get into everything, right? So when an attorney makes a representation to court, that's and it's actually a bar offense to lack candor with the court. But that is relied upon every day by the court. Well, are you going to do X, Y, Z? And part of it is because if the attorney lies to the court and says, yes, so-and-so is not going to be deported, they'll still be here, and that's a lie, then you get the person deported, and then they come back and say, Your Honor, we can't do anything. They're now in Timbuktu or some other place. And so the courts regularly rely upon the what they believe would be truthful representations of a lawyer, especially a government lawyer, who's representing the United States and all the people, as being true. When they're deciding whether to issue a temporary restraining order, preliminary injunction, what's the timing is going to happen, X, Y, Z. You promise X, something or other. When that breaks down, the courts then have to get into what I call a crouch pattern. And that's what they did in Maryland. They had such a chronic stream of lies. They promulgated a standing order in Maryland saying, anybody who files habeas corpus petition because they're trying to prevent what they allege is a wrongful deportation, you can't do anything for 48 hours. As soon as we receive that petition, we're going to freeze what the government can do for 48 hours so we can actually hear and find out what's going on. Before this standing order, they would have said, the government comes in and says, Your Honor, no, we're not going to do anything to this individual. They would have accepted that at face value. After all these lies, it's unprecedented to issue this standing order. And now the Department of Justice comes back and they're challenging the legality of the standing order. But it was their lies that created the need for the standing order, in order to make sure that they're operating on a habeas petition before the petitioner is already halfway around the world in a dungeon. And that is, and I can tell you, as a lawyer, that is beginning to break down the ability to have law as opposed to arbitrariness. You have to have a minimal sense of honor and truthfulness by the lawyers if the system's going to operate.
Do you think that's by design? Like, are they doing it on purpose, you think, or is that just incompetence?
No, I think they are doing it. I mean, we can extrapolate from what these emails and conversations had by the whistleblower against Emo Bove. He's been nominated to be the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. And he says, I was told to lie. He says, who gives a S about the courts? And this guy has he's a lower down guy. He's obviously, he was upset. He didn't want to get disbarred. And this
Ryan, I will explain to you why I think, in my opinion, there's little doubt that this is intentional. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go back to the trial regarding Trump's financial statements that have now been demonstrated in the court of law that they were fraudulent financial statements. First, I have to correct, many people don't understand this was not just a statement that got his loan, is that loan was conditioned upon him maintaining certain covenants with respect to collateral coverage, cash flow coverage. So it's not like it was just at the time he originated the loan that they did that. It was order to sit back and say, we'll lend you this money, but you're agreeing to preserve certain ratios. You're agreeing to have a certain amount of asset coverage. You're agreeing to have some sort of collateral coverage. You're agreeing to have some type of liquidity coverage. And every periodic period of time, you have to produce a financial statement to us to make sure that you're in compliance with that. And if you're not in compliance with that, we need to know. And at that point in time, once we'll know that, you and I will have to have a conversation. It'll trigger a conversation. Okay. So what did they do? During the period of time, it seems pretty evident that he could not meet with the conditions of the loan and could not uphold the collateral requirements that were necessary. So there were two options. Could have provided honest financials, which was his obligation to do. Okay. In spite of his fact that he claimed he made a disclaimer, that's a complete lie. He never made a disclaimer. His lawyers did a disclaimer, and his lawyer's only disclaimer was never along the lines that Trump said the disclaimer was. The lawyer just basically said, the accountants the accountants who produced the financials just said, we're letting you know this is the source of the information we're presenting the information with. So it never said it might be false. They never said we're presenting false stuff. We're saying is the obligation to us to present the truth as possible, but we're letting you know that some of this information has come directly from the client and not through third-party appraisals and stuff like that. So, but it was never saying, don't trust these numbers. They could all be lie and they could all be false numbers. It was just a statement for the law, so the accountants were protected. And Bidding Act saying is, when I'm presenting these numbers to you, I'm presenting as an accountant these numbers to you, just telling you where they came from. Okay, that was for the accountant to protect themselves. It had nothing to do with allowing Trump to lie, okay, and telling the bank it was their obligation to validate these numbers. No, the financial system doesn't work, does not work at all, if every 6 months when a company provides its information to its lender, that the lender every 6 months on every loan out there has to independently go out and validate every piece of information given to them. That would destroy the functionality of the whole financial system if that was their burden of obligation. Nobody would get loans, or only a few people would get loans in an environment like that where everybody had to then validate everything. No, you're making a statement. I promise to tell you the truth every time I submit numbers to you. That's the promise they made. But what would have been the consequences if Trump would have been honest? Maybe the loan would have been called. Maybe he would have been forced to sell assets. Maybe, who knows, the whole payment of the loan could be accelerated. So, or any combination of things, but it certainly would have not helped him get richer. Okay. That's why he ended up being punished for illicit enrichment, because of the fact is that he was able to get richer by lying about the loans, and he profited off the lies. And that's why the courts found him and fined him, because they said, you don't get rewarded for lying. Okay. Whatever profit you made for your lies, we're going to disgorge you of the profits that you made, that you profit from by lying. Okay. So when he said, so what do you think the conversation Trump had with his accountants? It was his conversation, you think about, let's tell the truth to the banks and let the consequences go where they be, or there's no way I want to be found in default of any of my covenants. So you figure out how to fabricate these numbers, come up with your own justifications for a number that finds us in compliance. No, clearly, if you look at some of the things they did, like take buildings that had restrictions on economic development and pretend that those restrictions didn't exist. To have properties subject to rent control and then value them based upon the absence of rent control. Okay, so there should be projects that were zoned for one use and assume it was zoned for a different use, even though it was not zoned for that use, and come with a valuation. Have money in an illiquid instrument and claim that was liquid cash. Okay, those were some of the things, if someone actually read the report, were the things that they did in making sure that they could be in compliance. Okay, and a jury went through that, and what did they say? This is bullshit. Okay, so this is his MO. Okay,
right. Jeffrey, it's better than that. I call Donald Trump against Donald Trump. Donald Trump to Mike Pence. Mr. Pence, you're way too honest. That's the mindset. And you're asking for intent, Ryan? There you have it. Right. It's all on display, and he's not reluctant, and he's not embarrassed by it.
No one wants to go back and tell him, this is the law, so this is all I can do. Okay. Right. So
to both your points,
they want to go back, and he says, you got to make it happen. You got to prove your loyalty to me. Okay. And you got to show what you're prepared to do. So what do? They manufacture any excuse they can come up with. Okay. Even if it means being as dishonest with the courts as he was dishonest with the courts, and the parties that he submits information to, with a promise that it's going to be truthful and honest information. So, that seems to be a pattern of his behavior. And why would people expect the pattern of behavior that's already established would change once he entered the White House? Now he has actual, then he didn't even have the type of immunity that he has now. Yeah. So now he's on steroids.
Right. Well, to both your points, if you look at me, I recommend, and I haven't read entirely all of his books, but I've looked through a lot of these different parts that people have highlighted for me, which very clearly show you that he outlines these kind of actions as something that should be praised. I mean, and you can even understand it from some kind of a, cutthroat business perspective, if that's how you want to write a book. This is how you can succeed. But in a world that we're living in. And so I think that he comes from a time where that was something, his shows and the WWE, that was the kind of character he put forward, where that kind of thing was praised in his circles. Then he stepped into the realm of this political dynamic, which he recognized, especially with, like, say, the Christian right in different places. They want him to project, I'm a Christian, I have values, I have principles, I care. None of that stuff is true if you read what he said in the past. Now, is it possible he shifted and changed his mind? Obviously, it's possible. But if you look at his actions, like we're highlighting, he still does the same things. My point is to show you that like both of you are pointing out, this is consistent for him. The difference is what he's projecting for people now to convince them that he's somehow different than then, even whether he's a Republican or something. He was a Democrat before. It's like he reinvented his entire picture to reach a certain crowd. And every day now he's continuing to show that he never really did change. And I think that's the bigger picture.
And let's think about the crowd, okay? Again, the crowd that I keep on referring to as morons, because that's what I believe, and that's what they show, okay? I watched a video of Homan the other day, dealing with a heckler. I watched it this morning. Some heckler apparently had some picture, some photo of something that was photoshopped. With I think what I read was Homan with MS-13 written on his hand. Okay, exactly. Exactly the same type of thing Trump did to Abrego Garcia, right? Trump was in a public interview, right? ABC or somever, where he did an interview. Trump pulled out this as evidence. Okay, the president of the United States took a Photoshop that was false, a lie, and tried to then convince the American public.
I grabbed the video for you if you want to bring it up.
It was lie. Oh, you got the video?
Yeah, if you want, you don't have to, but it's right there. It is so much worth watching.
And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute.
Well, wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
Oh, he had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshopped. So let me
That was Photoshopped. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. But I picked you, Terry. But you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
Right, we'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture. We'll
and you think
agree
it
to
was
disagree.
Photoshop? Well,
Here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine.
Terry,
I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when he was photographed in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They
Take a look at the photograph.
They're there now, right?
No, but they're in your picture.
Terry,
Ukraine, sir.
he's got MS-13 on his knuckle surface.
We'll take a look at
Why
that,
don't you just say, yes, he does? And
Wow. I genuinely think that Trump thought that. There's a nuance to whether he's part of the lie, but I think I wonder how angry he was after he came out and somebody said, Mr. Trump, you're wrong. And I think he genuinely thought that because somebody showed him that, whether he was lied to. God, that's embarrassing.
Of the American people, live TV, called the journalist a liar, said that's why people don't believe the media. Well, maybe people should not believe him, okay? Because he was the one that was the liar. He's saying to the American people, as president of the United States, is truthful or not truthful. He has got to give some consideration to saying, gee, if I'm going to say this, is it truthful or do I not care about whether it's truthful or not? You know what they call people who say things that don't care about whether it's truthful or not? That's called being a bullshitter, okay? So if you're a bullshitter, you can make statements not caring whether they're truthful or not, okay? Trump is a bullshitter, okay?
Yeah, and Ryan.
So now we have somebody at an audience making fun of what Trump did by doing the same thing to Homan, what Trump did to Abrego Garcia. Now they're at a TPUSA, 3-point USA thing. Yeah, so what is the response to this MAGA moron, Homan? What I call Tom Himmler Homan. Okay, what is Tim Homan's response? Is come up here and I'm going to kick your ass.
Really?
Applaud!
Oh my God.
Applaud! You're probably a loser peeing in your pants at home. Come on, come up and I'll kick your ass. Applause, applause. Really, this is our civic education. That you get up there, someone who's making a statement of the irony, okay, of this, and it's a legitimate irony because it's what the government did to somebody. Okay, so if it's okay for you as the government to do this to others, I'm making a statement. I can do it to you because you think it's all fun and games. So that's called irony. Okay, it's an appropriate use of irony. And what's the response of MAGA? The threat of physical violence and insult. And that's what gets a behavior, okay? And anyone dispute that
it's worse than that. I call it, it's not only, it's worse than Wernick, it's reptilian behavior. You know, okay, I'll just bite you then and resort to violence. But even assuming the best motives for Trump, he believed what he said. Ryan, he's had a lot of time since then, once he knew the truth, to say,
I'm in no way saying he's not dishonest. He's very dishonest.
No. And that's why I say it's not a situation. We're dealing with a man who's never once in his life ever said, I got it wrong.
Right.
Never. So it doesn't matter whether he said something on the spur of the moment and he corrects himself. He doesn't correct himself, right? Because he doesn't care. And unfortunately, his mega crowd doesn't care either. You can lie and lie and lie and lie, and it doesn't matter to us because it's a cult. It's a cult, is what it is. It's a cult of personality. There's no intellectual honesty. There's no intellectual substance to anything other than sheer, Trump narcissism. It's like the old Roman emperors, they got deified. That was it. But there was, other than that, there is no content to it. And if I want to take this time to divert a little bit.
Can I add one quick thing just to what you're saying, and I'll let you come back real quickly. I just want to point out that, just to clarify that, very clearly my point, the reason I thought that was relevant is because it's a moment where, despite him lying about everything, I actually thought he thought he was right. And I just think that's interesting and humorous, but go ahead. I thought that was the point to clarify.
The Trump is so divorced and denuded of any ideological content that he is leading what I call socialism, communism of the American economy. The latest is the Pentagon invests $400 million to become the largest shareholder, rare earth metals company. Really? Where? That's socialism. Right. If there ever was socialism. We have the CIA now has an investment fund where it tries to invest in what they think are sunrise or pioneering industries. What? This is the Trump people? This is the very definition of socialism. It sounds like Clement Attlee. So nationalize or socializing steel, the ports, coal, and everything else. And doesn't anybody see what's going on? And now we're also talking about a sovereign wealth fund. It's a euphemism for socialism. That's what it is. Government decides where they're going to invest the money. They would take control of these companies, decide where to invest or whatever. I mean, where's the blindness out there? We now have a socialist government that's called Mr. Trump. The same thing that he was deploring and blasting Kamala Harris and the Biden people doing. He's doing it on steroids. And nobody sees to open their eyes. This is obvious what's going on.
I think that's why. It's just like my point was with COVID, why I think, and this goes into, things people can disagree in regard to whether people are put in these positions. But I think Trump was in that position because it pacified what would have been the most resistant group against what happened. And I think the same thing's happening now, whether Israel or all of this technocracy, that they know that the people who are most resistant to where this goes, like they were with Biden, are the people that in many cases are blinding themselves to it because Trump's the one rolling it out. I think it's very clear. But the fascistic element to it that you also pointed out, I think, is obviously there too, Yeah.
We know that these decisions are made for ulterior political motives, right? We know that's what Trump is about. He decides unilaterally to impose steep tariffs on Brazil because he doesn't like what they're doing to Bolsonaro, right? So really, we know that is the motive. That's the ultimate motive of government. They do not act. They do not make investments. They do not act in the economy for what we would call economically rational and sensible reasons. They do it for one reason alone. How can this bolster? How can I help my friends and punish my enemies? It will always be that way, which is exactly why you never want it to happen in the first instance. And here we have Trump is a perfect example of how horrible it is to get the government involved. Look, in a different way, that's what he's doing with TikTok. I'm not going to force it to sell. Or maybe we can I'm not going to enforce the statute. We're not going to shut it down because he thinks maybe he can make some money off of it. And again, the one thing that I want to stress is we talk about Trump now because he's in the office. But the problem we're discussing isn't going away with Trump.
Right.
It's the entire decay of the culture. And if we don't address that through education and role models, we're done. We're going the way of every other empire. The Roman Colosseum will look like paradise compared to what the Lincoln Memorial is going to look like in 10 years' time.
And again, goes back to the same point that we all started with, is the fact is that our Constitution, our government, the idea that founded America was this is where liberty would reside, okay? And that our obligation as people who have inherited this, is our obligation is to preserve what we were endowed with, okay? And we were endowed with one thing, the statement of that this country should always be the flag bearer, the standard for liberty, and welcomed everyone who wanted to live in a state of liberty, where they could become their fullest potential, making no claims on anyone else, other than being self-sovereign individuals who would be self-reliant.
And Jeffrey, that finds expression in the Statue of Liberty. 1880 Statue of Liberty, it's there. What is the Statue of Liberty? Not Statue of Power, not Statue of Equality, a Statue of Liberty. That's as late as 1886. But I'm telling you, my view is that once we started getting the business, Spanish-American War being a global empire, liberty went out the window. It's all about power, ulterior motives, money, World War I, World War II, entering the Panama Canal, invading Haiti, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Mexico, and everything else. And that happened, my judgment, is because you go back there. That was the turning point when the educational system began to become decrepit. Partly we're too far away from the wisdom of the framers. And then we have these idiots like Woodrow Wilson. He's an academic, but he didn't know anything about anything other than his belief that smart people like him knew how to make other people happy and fulfilled. And that's why we would have the government run by technocrats. He hated Madison and Liberty. He thought, well, he's smarter than anybody else. He should tell them how to live their lives. But that's the emblem, Jeffrey, of what you're announcing is the Statue of Liberty. Yes. And that's why everyone's sailing into Ellis Island. The immigrants came in and they became Americans because they believed in the idea of America. Hard work, discipline, rule of law, virtue. We move up. That's it. You're an American. We don't even need naturalization. You're already American as soon as you subscribe to those ideas.
Right.
And
basically, we as a people have to determine whether we're prepared to be honest with ourselves or not. Okay, and what do I mean by that? We need to be honest with ourselves and say, basically, the only goal of government is to preserve, protect, and defend our liberty, which means that everything government does, it has to defend and why it advances the cause of liberty. Or we can think the political competition is basically a game, a competition for property rights over who gets to tyrannize who.
Right.
Okay. So the reality is the American people. Okay, which is why I don't think very highly of the American people. Okay, or any people for that matter. For people in general, is the game they're playing is how do I get property rights so I get to control who tyrannizes who. Okay, they're not fighting for liberty. So the question is, going back to also this initial video, is can we, through these types of conversations, inspire just 3.5% of the American population? Are there 3.5% of the population out there who really care about liberty? Are they willing to fight and defend, fight in a nonviolent way? The cause of liberty, or have they had no interest anymore in fighting for the cause of liberty? And the only game they want to play is in competition for who gets to control and have property rights over the ability to be a despot, to be a tyrant, to be a demagogue, to be an autocrat, and that they're just fighting over the property rights of who gets to control who gets to tyrannize who gets to instill fear in who gets to dole out, the spoils, as Andy Jackson said to the victim, go spoils. So who controls the allocation and dispensation of spoils, and also punishments to people? Because also, going back to the comment that Bruce made, there were a group of academics that went through very carefully analysis of who benefited and who were punished by the tariffs and the exemptions that Trump gave the first term, and they found very strongly that Trump's allies and friends got exemptions from those he believed as his enemies. So he used tariffs as a weapon to reward his friends and punish his enemies. People actually think that that's all legitimate role of government, and to the extent that they believe it's a legitimate role of government is because they're okay with the concept of I'm controlling the power and I'm dispensing it in a way that I get to choose, make these allocation decisions because I want privileges and preferences to another group of people, and that's what people lobby because they want to be the winners, not the losers, in the games of who gets the privileges and preferences and who gets punished.
Yeah, well, we see that right now in terms of the immigration enforcement. Okay, Trump says, okay, don't go to farms, don't go to hospitality places, because people who are working at Mar-a-Lago or Westminster or some other places that Trump operates, because then that benefits him because he can't be as financially.
Unless you're a farmer in California, the blue state, you hate Gavin Newsom. And so you want to make Gavin Newsom look as bad as possible. So you want to allocate disproportionate resources to the state of California, and I would be curious because there are a lot of illegals in Texas. I'm peculiar how many businesses are, and is there a normal distribution of the allocation of the use of this ICE resources, fairly equal distribution to where the illegals are, or is there a greater allocation to basically embarrassing his political enemies? And Newsom seems to be, high on his list.
It's not just that. It's because right now this is a decision out in California. It's not just choosing the state. He's telling, and they're using as an earmark of being illegal. If you're Spanish, if you're Latino, right? That's suddenly the presumption of innocence ends.
Right.
So they think if you're Latino, you have reasonable suspicion and you can stop and frisk them, whatever. No, that's not how the law works. It has to work even-handedly, colorblind. And this is what goes back, and this is a very, very old decision of the U.S. Supreme Court called Yickwo versus Hopkins. It says even if a law looks neutral and fair on its face, if it's administered in a way that's invidious and just targets a group, it's still a violation of the Constitution, equal protection of the laws. And right now in California, that's why the judge issued this order saying you've got to stop using simply ethnicity and race as a foundation for stopping and frisking people. And Holman doesn't really understand that.
He doesn't care.
He thinks that you can just target people.
What did the guy from the California region border patrol say? I can go anywhere, anytime I want. Okay, so he can go into your home whenever he wants, at his National Guard with him. He can invite ICE with him. He can invite the Marines with him, and they can come into your home whenever they choose to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what they're asserting. Okay, they assert they can have absolutely no criteria for doing so. They can do it because they want to do it. So that's what they're claiming the right to do. Okay,
that's indistinguishable from the Gestapo. In the 1930s in Nazi Germany.
And that's why they're being compared to the Gestapo. Exactly. Because they're claiming rights that basically the Gestapo claimed. The Gestapo were not responsible, for what happened in the concentration camps. They were responsible for taking people and putting them into concentration camps. So, without, and to some extent, at least, they were just horrible laws, and they were following the horrible laws. Here, they're not following
we're
laws.
violating the law. The U.S. Supreme Court has been clear for 200 years. The government cannot go into a home even to make an arrest or search without a warrant, unless there's on fire, right? Those exigent circumstances, automatically a Fourth Amendment violation. And one of the great ironies is that it was the Fourth Amendment violation, the right to privacy, that James Otis underscored in his 1761 address. That was the trigger of the American Revolution. Against the petty officials, the Brits would come in, walk into homes, search for contraband, sleep overnight. The military was there. That was the beginning of the American Revolution. The right to privacy, the right to be let alone. Now we've destroyed it completely. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not only the entry into the homes, they surveil, they intercept every communication we have with the National Security Agency, not based upon individualized warrants. They just say everything's national security, these things, and then we'll invoke state secrets so you don't really know whether we've intercepted any of your conversations. That's how bad it is.
I wanted to ask you guys about this. Thanks for bringing it up, Jeffrey. Have you guys, this is an important conversation which applies to California, obviously, but like the entire state of Maine exists within this, which is not what the ACLU and others have framed it as, but it's referred to as the Constitution-free zone. This is a real thing. ACLU has covered this. This is under the concept of border patrol. And what they're arguing is that this is the necessary zone for enforcement of the border, which they argue are not bound by the Constitution for their own words. And this has gone for a long time. I have the ACLU article right here that was let's see, that was written in 2008. And so it's really interesting to see how long this has been happening and how much this encroaches. And I think today, we're at a point now with their argument about not just with the enforcement, but they said the travel routes and all these different points of even just enforcement on anyone they think is an illegal alien. I think this represents the entire country at this point. So I just want to put that for point of conversation and one of your thoughts on the zone itself.
Right. I strongly agree with that because at least in the past, it was the whole country, but they didn't have enough money to cover the whole country, and to impose a reign of terror throughout the whole country.
Good point, yeah.
Now they have the money to do that, okay? So now, before they never had the funding, now they had the funding. Let's get back to what one of the grievances were in the Declaration of Independence. One of the grievances were that the king could not send a military force into any jurisdiction, without it being subject to the civil control of that jurisdiction, okay? So what did we have Trump do? We had Trump send the military into California, not subject to the control of that civil government, okay? So what Trump is doing is one of the many grievances that we had of the Declaration of Independence that basically Trump is fired. I mean, it's not the only grievance that Trump is as guilty of as the King of England is guilty of. Our tariff and trade policy, limits on immigration. So there are a bunch of grievances that are in the Declaration of Independence that we said to the King of England is, you did this, we told you this was not right, you've ignored us, we're declaring our independence. So Trump has done many of the things that grievances legitimate enough for us to declare our independence.
This is the actual language, Ryan and Jeffrey. The language is, he has affected to render the military independent and superior to the civil power. Right. That's the language that they use.
Back then.
Now,
that's what Trump has done in California, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
It's what the Marines are. That's military power. He's done that elsewhere in Texas, in addition.
They're enforcing law.
And what did the people who signed the Declaration of Independence, supposedly Trump celebrated in July 4th? Yeah. What did they have to say about that act?
Right.
What did they say about it?
No, they said about it, it's justified. It was dissolving the government and overthrowing George
the power we want to get the president to have?
Yeah. No, the power that was justified to overthrow King George III and move on to a new dispensation that would protect the liberty of civilian government. But the U.S. Supreme Court years ago, why we have this border area. It's kind of it's not a complete constitution-free zone, but they said that when you're crossing you're entering the country, that you don't have to have a Fourth Amendment probable cause in order order to stop and detain somebody. But that was years ago, as Jeffrey pointed out. And moreover, it's been expanded to just stopping and detaining someone physically, to also searching for their cell phone, seeing all the First Amendment stuff. So you come in and and Border Patrol says, yeah, well, I can sit down for hours and look through your entire laptop and see whether it says anything nasty about Donald Trump or anything else under the sun. That's independent First Amendment violations in my judgment. I don't think that border is constitution free, at least in the sense that it enables First Amendment violations. Said things protected by the First Amendment that the government doesn't like. But this is a whole region that, in my judgment, the U.S. Supreme Court needs to completely reevaluate because of the abuses that have arisen, given the vastly greater resources. And they say the entry now into the First Amendment realm. It's not just physically we want to stop and search you for contraband. We just want to get into your brain and see all the people you've been talking to.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, it was important to flesh out is my thought on this. And this is why the articles are written and refer to it like that, and I've covered as well, is that once you open that door and you give them the loophole, the allowance to argue that these things don't apply, if and when there's a circumstance, as we've learned through history, the government will take advantage of that. And so my point is that we have a situation like, which I still think is crazy. The entire state of Maine exists within that border. It's like, how is that even possible? But it just shows the point is that they have expanded this throughout the country, and how long until this just becomes the norm already, and the U.S. citizen overlap. And, there's so many different angles this is going in that is the point we start with. And just in general, the constitutional root to this is that they are actively destroying this with everything they do. And unless we do something to stop it, this will be gone. I mean, even just by precedent, if this continues on for a year, 2 years, 10 years, like how long until it just becomes the norm?
You know how you can make it the norm, Ryan, and this is the type of thing that has me worried, and more people who are civic minded and just minded should be concerned about. And this is analogous to the birthright citizenship and the Supreme Court ruling, basically saying that everybody has to bring case by case, or a class action lawsuit. Now think about this Rosie O'Donnell thing that could be done on others. What if Trump goes out there and starts saying, I'm going to take a list of all the people who I don't like, and I'm going to deprive them of citizenship rights, and I'm going to say they're no longer citizens, and then if any of them try and vote, you arrest them for voting illegally, or I just deport them because they're not citizens. So I say, you're no longer citizens, you deport them. Okay. Now I bring a case up. What the Supreme Court is saying is that everyone say, well, they didn't have this right to do this, So really, in a de facto basis, he could get away with violating what is de jure illegal. Okay. So if he could go out and just say, I'm going to go out to every hospital, and as soon as a baby is born, I'm going to remove them all and deport them all. If in their jurisdictions that are known to have a bunch of illegal immigrants. So I'm going to be waiting there in the delivery rooms. I'm going to pick up all these delivered babies, send them to Libya or South Sudan or El Salvador. I'm going to send it to them because none of them are citizens. So I'm deporting them. And, and then, I'm not going to tell the parents where they are. I have no obligation to do so. And the parents are going to have to figure out where their kids are. The question is, will the parents be allowed to have stand get away with actually being able to do this? So this is becoming normalized. There are going to be people out there that say, gee, I don't believe Rosie O'Donnell should be a citizen of the U.S. She can't say this about Trump and, be there over in Scotland or Ireland, wherever they are, waiting for him to leave office and come back. No, he hates the country. She has no right to be a citizen. I don't care what the Constitution says. She doesn't have the right. And then, and then they'll intimidate the courts, and it'll become normalized, where people will say, gee, I don't want to speak up because this guy is very popular. He's a successful demagogue, or she's a successful demagogue, a successful despot, and we're gonna let this happen, unless we slap these comments down immediately. And how do you slap them down? Okay, there's no way the president, the leader of the country, okay, should be insulting individuals for their beliefs. Okay, right. They could disagree, but not insult. Okay, people claim to be. What does it mean to be if you claim to be a public servant? Unless you're just saying I'm not really a public servant, which I'm sure Trump doesn't really believe he's a public servant. And most public servants probably don't really believe they're public servants, even though they use that excuse when they want to sound holier than thou and that they're a superior race of people, and then they use the word public servant. I don't know what public servant. If my lawyer insults me, I fire my lawyer. If my accountant insults me, if they don't tell me everything, if they don't answer any question I ask them, not only can I fire them, I can get them disbarred and have them lose their license. So there's nobody out there that's no coercive power over them, and supposedly they are serving me. No, they're serving themselves at my expense. So I think that so I just think again there should be a level of respect that a president should not be insulting and making these claims. And the only way of disciplining it, which is the point Bruce gets back to, is that we have a pathetic Congress. It's a president would respect the Constitution, which they don't. And also it's our obligation to hold the Congress accountable for not holding the president accountable.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I want to point out, too, how dangerous this is. Maybe will happen in a lifetime. There is nothing now in terms of Trump's theory of limitless executive power that would prevent him from saying, okay, I'm going to turn all my political supporters, the white Afrikaners, grant them citizenship so they can come vote for me, right? Why not? If you can deprive people of citizenship by executive order, why not grant them citizenship by executive order, right? And he would use that for political purposes. He goes to the far right in Germany, hey, you can come here and vote for me. Maybe he could give them citizenship and they could do absentee voting. But we know that's what the political mindset always working. How can I use this to my political advantage? And going to Jeffrey's point, to say, okay, who are the people that he's going to deport? Then I'm going to look at the babies, the people who live in democratic areas, deport them. You're not going to deport anybody who thinks is going to vote for him, right? So the whole thing will be turned into a complete political instrument. Citizenship will just be a political football. You get it or you don't get it, depending upon whether the president likes you or not. And he just changes your status by executive order. I don't think the Trump people don't understand that if you can deny people citizenship on executive order, you can grant them. Is the successor going to cut citizens again? This completely crazy ideas going around. But that's where we are when there's no rule of law anymore, and it's just personal whim. Come in, then you get a new ruler. The opposite is the law that it was 24 hours ago.
It's interesting the same that the argument anyway about Biden, right? Even though that's a very nuanced and not even accurate point these days, what's interesting is that the hypocrisy on display that now it's okay in reverse, right? But to add to that too, let's not forget that we all saw him recently about the farms and leisure, that those illegal aliens are okay because whatever his logic is, there's reasoning. So it's like you're saying, he can do anything he wants. He can waive okay, he can waive, which by the way is the same point he's making about Biden with the people from Sudan and so on, where he said, okay, well, they're allowed to stay here because X, Y, and Z. It's so blatantly hypocritical. So it all comes down, like you're saying, to there's a term for this actually of the tyranny of the partisan side, where all they want to do is force their mindset onto the people they see as their adversary, which is just half of this country. And I think that's by design.
Yeah, I mean, and think of how contrary it is to the framers' mindset. And sometimes the mood is more important than the detail. And when Jefferson comes in and he's got, this is the first real transition from the Federalist to the Jeffersonian, called the Republican Democrats administration in 1800. He says openly that the minority has rights that the majority is bound to respect, even though they're not bound in the sense that you can prevent the majority from enacting laws. But it says morally, you have to give consideration to the minority. And that was, of course, enshrined in the Constitution Bill of Rights. But that was the attitude. I mean, the number of people that Jefferson threw out of work on the transition from Adams was a handful. It wasn't to the winner belong the spoils. He still had an idea of a meritocracy, aristocracy of merit. That was just the climate of the times, even though Jefferson didn't have any great affection at that time with John Adams. But they understood they had basic common principles of decency that guided them politically. That's gone today. There's not a single principle of decency that informs the executive or legislative branches whatsoever.
And there's a point to be made about decorum.
Go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
No, that was really quick. Just there's a point to be made about just decorum, right? Just whether or not they have to do that. What Trump is and what this team seems to represent is just, not just rampant lawlessness, but just crude, crass, immature, naive, and that's, it's something that at least, like, good examples, Obama. I mean, I think Obama, I was just as concerned. I see just as many problems with Obama that I see with Trump and all the rest of these presidents, but at least he presented in a way that seemed somewhat, whatever you could call it. And that's a dangerous mask, in my opinion. That's why I think in many ways Trump's mask off. But what they're doing, I think, is designed to drive us into like the lowest common denominator. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that, Crown. That's what they do. They're bringing the country down to the bottom of the Maslow pyramid.
Yes.
So when they should be elevating us to the top of the Maslow pyramid. So I find that disgusting and appalling. But what isn't being discussed about, which I think requires and I think we're close to finishing today's segment, but I want it to be on people's mind, is Trump's now efforts to get control over monetary policy in the Fed. So, and people thinking through the consequences associated with that. Got to remind people that between the Constitution and the first Coinage Act, when people talked about in the Constitution the dollar and its fixed exchange rate to the silver or silver and gold, either through the Constitution or then through the first Coinage Act, the dollar they were referring to was itself a coin, a Spanish milled dollar. It was not a U.S. printed dollar. Okay, there was no Fed printing U.S. dollars out there. This was a Spanish milled dollar where the government had no control over its circulation. So they wanted to separate out money from government, and they thought that if the government ever got control over money, that tyranny would be inevitable. Okay, and again, that was the issue. That was one of the main issues that had Madison worried about the failure of the Articles of Confederation, was all the fiat money that was in circulation in the numerous states, and they wanted to eliminate that fiat money, and they didn't want it to be replaced by the government control of a printing press. So they were against fiat money, period. Okay, they only were for sound money that they had no control over. Okay, so now we have. Let's think through the consequences of what if Trump gets control of the Fed. He will be setting interest rates. He will be setting monetary policy, and he will be running the entity that is responsible for auditing all the banks. So can you think about what happens if a banker objected to his policies, and what would happen if Trump I'm going to send a team of people that will audit that bank that has funded my political enemies. Okay, so people have not really thought through the danger of giving the president, any president, whether it's Trump or anyone else, I don't believe in the Fed at all, but at least if there's a Fed, we hope that has some level of independence from politics, rather than the whole concept of how capital gets allocated will be driven completely by politics, and now at least it's not completely independent of politics, but at least it's a little more independent of politics. Politics will determine through regulatory guidelines where banks should allocate capital. Like we like to lend. The government wants to encourage people to fund home ownership. So that seems to be an objective that Republicans and Democrats share, is that they want to subsidize home ownership. So they want to encourage through regulatory policy banks lending a lot for home ownership. So they can influence how banks allocate capital in a general terms, but not necessarily pick a lot of individual winners and losers. But if Trump gets to control the Fed, which is what he's trying to do, he can now choose how every dollar of capital gets allocated in the country, be through either people applying through the SEC, and then him asking for the golden share that gives him the control of the governance rights of the company, or go into every specific bank and look at the loans they make and not make, and if they're making loans to people who have funded against him, that he can penalize the ranking of those loans, and force banks to lend to those types of businesses, and starve the type of businesses because of them funding people he perceives to be his enemies. And so far, the only evidence that we have is if there's one thing he's intent on doing is going after every one of his enemies. Okay. So
Jeffrey, I think what you've described is just another form of socialism. Look at the Silicon, and I don't think it's just Trump, the Silicon Valley bank bailout. These are the people who had, more than the $250,000 insurance coverage. Oh, we got to bail these people out. These are the multimillionaires. It's another form of the oligarchs in Russia. This is socialism. This happened at the TARP. It happened in 2008 as well. All these staggering. I mean, IMG got like $175 billion. AIG in government funds, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and all this stuff. This is the definition of socialism. And it's happened. Trump would take it to a new level for sure. We're already there. This is why are we surprised about this? We already laid the seeds. Trump's just taking it to a new level. And I come back for the 80th time. His successor is not going to give anything back. He's going to keep it and take it to a new level unless one thing happens. We tell the Congress, impeach that SOB and get him out. Until that happens, it's a one-way ratchet to limitless socialism with the president running the socialist economy.
No, I don't know though. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There's not much I disagree with. There's not much I agree with Bernie Sanders, I should say. But when Bernie Sanders said we have socialism for the wealthy and rugged individualism for the poor, there's a great element of truth to that.
Yeah. Well, question to the Fed. Obviously what we're talking about today is the idea that these are just lawless people that do what they want anyway. So it's not whether they can in that sense, but is it legally speaking, I don't think the presidency or the U.S. government can take over the Fed. I mean, it's a private entity. People don't know that mostly. It's not a federal thing. It's a private, you guys know that, but is that even legally possible? Can they just?
No. Yeah. The president, Ryan, the president appoints the board of governors of the Federal Reserve.
But in the sense of taking over control of it, though, is that possible for them to, legally speaking? Not that,
he'll just claim, he'll just fire him and put his people in.
Oh, okay. In that sense, okay.
That's what he'll do.
Right.
And then once his people are there, then they'll do what he tells them to do, and they issue their own regulations and everything else for sure.
Yeah.
If you look at the composition of the Fed right now, the board of governors, okay, part of the board of governors are selected by the presidents and confirmed by Congress. The others are appointed are the Federal Reserve Bank presidents of each Federal Reserve Bank, and each Federal Reserve Bank is privately owned.
Let me correct you, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, you're referring to the Federal Open Market Committee, which is broader than just the Board of Governors.
Right.
If you just look at the Board of Governors, they're all appointed by the president. The
Right.
Federal Open Market Committee is broader, and you're correct. It does have presidents of the regional banks, but the Board of Governors, no, it's all presidential.
Yes. So the oversight of the regulatory apparatus, of the oversight of the regulation of banks, are done by the Board of Governors.
Yes, that's correct.
So the president will appoint the person who's responsible for the audit of the banks.
Yeah.
And that person will be accountable to the president.
Yeah.
So the president can call any of them in if they have no independence and say, Citibank was funding this bank. Come over and let me review every loan Citibank made. I want to see every single loan, that they made. I want to get a list of people. Let's call one of Elon Musk's disciples in, and we'll basically use AI to find out and segment all the loans into Trump donors and not donors. And then we'll have a third category of those who donated to people I run against. So
Wow.
we might not treat badly the people who just don't give to politics. We got to make sure we take care of the people who donated to me. And then we got to make sure that we punish those that donated to somebody else. So and then I want maybe let's do it a more subtle way. If a Trump supporter wants a mortgage, we give a mortgage at 3%. If somebody who's not a Trump supporter wants a mortgage, we give it to them at 10%. Okay. So, and they could do this. Okay. They would have the capacity of doing this. Yeah. They could go in and take every loan that was given by someone not a Trump supporter and say, we think this is a bad loan. Okay. You gotta sell the loan. You got to get it off the books. And basically they can make that person saying, this is a bad credit risk. Okay. So then basically they can make that person unbankable. Okay. Without really saying this person is unbankable, they can take a whole bunch of steps that would essentially make that person de facto unbankable, even if de jure they're bankable.
Or another way to say that is being debanked, which is a thing that we should all be aware of today, how the political system can just, box you out of the way. And my point is that as we step into this like technocratic control, or rather just technological control structure that is, where you can be censored, you can be debanked. So the idea with adding that is this political influence over these things. I mean, it's all encompassing, the point is where you won't exist anymore.
So if we think about the environment, they're trying to bankrupt Columbia. They're trying to bankrupt Harvard. They were trying to bankrupt every law firm that ever represent anyone that brought a lawsuit against him. Okay. So, this is the state, this is the mentality of vindictiveness they have. So with this level of vindictiveness they have, imagine giving them more power over the ability to have oversight over every single loan given by every single bank, because they now control the Fed.
Listen, I think, however, that I'm sounding like a broken record, but these phenomenon that Trump has taken to a new level, they didn't just originate. He took them to a new level. We remember the Keating Five. All along, banks aren't stupid. They can give special loans, to politicians who have particular power. I mean, LBJ was great about this, and he manipulated the Federal Communications Commission. He had his radios or whatever. But it keeps growing in one direction. It never retreats. And that's why the real revolution that we need to have is in the ethos of the American people. We've had it. We're going back. We're taking our power and our destiny back. We get pride out of making our own ambitions succeed. Government, we want to reduce. But until that happens, we're just shouting in the wind.
But it doesn't happen, and then if we don't get back to where we started. If we don't have a national consensus that the Constitution is clear, the role of government is to advance liberty.
Liberty, correct.
And to end on a positive note.
And moreover, to add, I apologize, Ryan, the chief way in which liberty is safeguarded is through separation of powers. Nobody has unchecked power. And you interpret separation to say, if this helps to secure liberty by blocking limitless power, it's not violating separation of powers. Separation of powers has some maneuvering to it, but it's always there to try to protect liberty and block unchecked power. It's not some hermetic seal between the three branches. It's just to say, to the extent it's an overlap, when the overlap works to check and promote liberty, it's okay. If it undermines liberty, it's not okay. It goes back to the one touchstone that Jeffrey pointed out: liberty is the goal. That's the end point. So everything that works towards that end point is constitutional. Things that undermine it are not. There can be gray areas where you can dispute it, but 99% of the cases, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I agree. And just on a positive note, for my broken record, right? The idea that I genuinely think that people are beginning to see this. Now, we can debate whether it's majority, and that's a fair conversation to have, but I think we all see that there is a change happening. And I think we're watching the power structure try to kind of flail and, do something to drive you back in. But whether we, get presented with the new America Party and that's the new ploy, the point is that people are at a moment right now where they are beginning to see through these things. And I just think that's a very positive thing to think about. And I think it shows you the kind of the diminishing influence of these kind of long-term manipulations that we're just all tired of, And so I really do appreciate these conversations, because I think people are really thirsty for this. It's a breath of fresh air, even for me, to come on the show and just be like, it's so nice to have this kind of conversation with so much nonsense going on today. So I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, but I just want to say, and it's not there's so many distractions, today that it's not going to succeed unless this becomes part of someone's self-identity of civic duty. It's not an avocation. It's a full-time job to secure and to operate self-governance, especially when you have more irresponsible people entering politics, because the money and the power is so much greater. You attract even worse people there. And I'm just saying that you got to dedicate a serious amount of your life to this issue, because it's the right thing to do for your posterity, your kids and your grandchildren. If not, they're going to inherit complete tyranny. There will be no liberty left whatsoever. And you should feel a sense of responsibility on that score. Again, we have to work collectively because we have elections, but that means that you shouldn't give up because it's not going to change the world tomorrow. You make your voice known. You have your opportunity to speak to your member of Congress, or write to the executive, talk to your friends, inform your voting, out there and have town meetings, get engaged. Other people come along, and those voices then can persuade and change the government. I go back again to the example of slavery. When the abolitionists first began seriously in 1833, they're all told crazy, going to run out of town. It's never going to happen. Well, in 1865, it did happen. And the operator of the Liberator magazine, Lloyd Garrison, was there in 1865 when the amendment was ratified. Okay. It took him some 32 years, but he persisted, and it took a long time and a lot of suffering. So we need to be able to work for the long run. Even if we end up getting no credit for it, it doesn't matter. Even if somebody else gets the credit, hey, the more people enjoy liberty, that's a reward for me, and I'm in favor of it.
You're here.
I can't, that should definitely be the last words. So thank you both again for always a stimulating and wonderful conversation, and just have a great week.
Okay, thanks, Ryan and Jeffrey. Have a great